Hello and welcome back to the Toolbox series. In this video, we're going to get the thing sanded. Let's get going. Sanding. We're almost there. Project is nearly complete, but that is no excuse to rush this stage. Take your time with this because it will make a huge difference to the finished piece. So I'm going to talk you through each step of the way. So at the end of the day, it's a box. It's a pretty simple thing to sand. And the way we're going to do it is start by doing all of the internal things to begin with. This tray is mostly done. I've just got to take a few of the corners off the top edges here and make sure they're all looking clean, but that's mostly there. The bits I haven't done yet is I haven't sanded the top edges of the box, the bottom of the lid, or taken off any of those corners. And so that's something that definitely needs doing. As for taking off the corners, the only ones we're going to do to start with is the internal corners of the main carcass and also of the lid. Once we've done that and we've got all the internals sanded, we're then going to reattach the lock, reattach the hinges and everything, because when we do the internals, we'll obviously be separating everything, but we'll get everything reinstalled, get the box assembled again, close it, lock it, and then sand all the outside while it's together. This will ensure that any minor misalignments are flushed off, and we'll get no surprises should we sand and finish these all separately, put them together, and then find out nothing lines up and you'll have to sand it. It's not somewhere you want to be, really. So we'll start with the internals and then move to the outside afterwards. So starting with the tray, let's do these bottom edges first. And I'm using a hard block to mount the sandpaper over to ensure I don't get any unexpected pillowing, but don't forget we have actually taken off this corner already, so it doesn't actually matter here. Nice, careful strokes. And this has been previously planed, so I'm actually jumping straight to 240 grit for this. And you notice I'm not scrubbing away. I'm just doing careful, even strokes to ensure that that sandpaper is sitting flat on the edge. Now, miters are always a challenging one to sand because if you go one way, you end up getting horizontal scratch marks here. If you go the other way, you get them here. One way around this is to do circular motions on the corners. This effectively acts like a random orbit sander, and when you take it away, the mark should be significantly reduced. However, if you look real close, they are still there. Personally, I just go through the effort of sanding with the grain and stopping at the miter. And I find the easiest way to do this is wrap the sandpaper around close to the edge of the block, start it on the miter, and just drag back. You only need to do it a few times on the miter itself. And you can just like blend in the rest there. And again here. It is a little bit tedious, but I think it's worth it. And there we go, no scratch marks. And then of course, don't forget to do that internal corner as well. It's gonna be difficult to get a block in there, so I'm just gonna take it off with it around my finger. All right, top corners. So these are the ones that I'm quite careful on because they're one of the first things you'll see when the box is open. So let's start by just doing the top surface to begin with. Long strokes to start with, and then we'll address the corners after. Internal corners next, just taking off enough to make it feel soft, but nothing like too heavily rounded over. When rounding off internal corners, just watch out for paying equal attention to the corners as you do in the middle. Because if you're doing through strokes like this, it's very easy to put a big chamfer in here, but then not much on the edges. So for those, I sort of do a few horizontal strokes just to get it started, and then carry it through and finish it off with a few horizontal strokes. Just ensures that you get a nice even chamfer right up to the corners that way. As for the outside edges, straight through. And using touch for this point is the best way of trying to find flaws. Don't always rely on your eyes. In fact, yeah, there's a bit there. I can't even see what it is. It just feels a bit lumpy. So a few more through strokes like that. Sorted. Right, so let's break this box apart now. Take off all the hardware and then get sanding this. Don't forget to double check all of your hardware is marked before you start setting it aside. Right, so the lid. What we're going to focus on for the time being is the top face and the internal corner. Oh, and we can also do this chamfer at the back that we use to stop the hinges at the desired angle. The front three corners, however, let's leave them for now until after the lid is attached, because that way we'll have the most control over how the box will look after it's assembled. You're not really going to see the back, and besides that's primarily functional rather than decorative by this point. So hard block again, careful even strokes. And I've got quite a lot of cleanup to do here because oak just gets quite grubby while you're working on it. So I've gone for 120 grit for now. Next, we turn our attention to the hardware, and not only the mechanism side of things, but also the screws themselves. Just take a look at some of these heads and discard the ones where you've sort of chewed them up with the screwdriver a bit. We've obviously taken these in and out a few times, so that would be totally understandable, but go through them and make sure they're all looking nice. As for the hinges, I did previously get these polished up and most of the work is done, but they've got this sort of layer of candle wax on them from where I was waxing the screws, and it's got a bit grubby. There's also a few scratches here and there, so I'm just going to go back over with one of these micro mesh pads to get it back up to standard. You may also recall in the previous episode I had to file away the end of one of the leaves to stop it interfering with the tray, and so I'm going to give that a little bit more attention with some sandpaper, take off the sharp corners and stuff like that, and make sure they're all looking uniform, while also being sure to tackle the knuckle at the back as well, because that, well, not necessarily in this case, but in most cases that is seen. As for the lock, that comes in 2 parts. Again, I have given this a bit of a polish and it's been sanded down from where I was removing these lumps on the back, but I'm just going to go over it once more with a bit of sandpaper and try and get back through to that shiny surface while also finishing it up with some of this micro mesh. And we've got the section that goes on the lid, exactly the same thing, just going to sand it back until it looks nice. Okay, I'm just going to put a little bit of microcrystalline wax over some of these components just to help protect them a little bit. I don't normally do this, I've just got it to hand and figured I might as well. So that is all the internal gubbins sorted, everything sanded, all internal edges have been arrised and all the internal hardware has been polished. Now, close it. Lock it, don't lose the key, and we're going to start focusing on the outside now. But before you get carried away doing these faces, if we think about this, the best course of action is probably going to be to do the bottom first. Because if we sand the entire thing, then flip it over and do the bottom, everything is just going to get scratched on the top side. And realistically, does the bottom need more than 1 coat? I mean, it's going to get worn through anyway, so personally I've only ever done 1. I'm going to get this sanded, get it finished, leave it overnight, flip the box over, and do the rest of the sanding and the finishing at a later date. So for this, nice and simple, hard block around the edges, and because these are miters, of course, we're going to be careful to stop at those miters instead of getting cross-grain scratches, but saying that, it's the bottom, do you really care? I'll let you decide on that. And then we've got these tongue and groove slats. These have 45-degree chamfers around the outside, and there's also chamfers in between them. I've got a block of wood like this with a perfect 90-degree edge, and to get in there, we'll just separate them as much as we can and then get the block at 45 degrees to hit both of those chamfers at once. That'd be a really nice way of cleaning up between them all. Right, it's now the next day. We're going to flip it over. Never to be seen again. And I'm going to sand the outsides of this now. God, it's a good job I did pre-finish this, look. Where did that come from? Anyway, I'm going to blast the remaining 4 sides of this with the random orbit sander with the lid attached, and I'll also do this top panel with the random orbit sander. And then after that, we'll get arrising the top corners, the bottom corners, and also ever so slightly in that join between the lid and the carcass. So let's get into it. Okay, so the surfaces are all sanded and I've also arrised the top and bottom edges. I've actually rounded these over a slightly more than I normally do, just because it's a toolbox, it's going to be handled quite a lot. In comparison to proper furniture, I'm not necessarily wanting it to look super crisp. I'd rather it just be nice to handle. So I've gone for a bit more of a round over. The next bit we need to focus on is the join between the lid and the carcass and how much you round that over, because of course if I do it to the same amount I've done here, we're going to get a big shadow gap around the front. Bear in mind though that with these cheaper hinges, there is a bit more of a gap at the back than there is at the front. I did mention that you could get rid of that by sinking in the hinges even deeper, but I personally don't like the look of that when it's open, so I just live with this. You could also get around it by using some expensive hinges that close flush with one another. But anyway, let's talk you through how I actually do this arrising here. So for taking the edges off anywhere else on the box, I would normally go for maybe a 180 and then a 240 grit, but in cases like this, where I actually want that join to be pretty fine, I just go straight to the 240, wrap it around a hard block, and just a couple of strokes up each edge. And again, you've got to do this a little bit by feel, but you'll probably find that just a couple of strokes is enough to take off that sharp edge. But of course, this is up to you. One of my students once put a massive chamfer around the carcass and around the lid, and although it made the gap look massive, it certainly had its own unique look about it that he personally quite liked. So there you go, that's how you sand the box in preparation for finishing. Nice and simple, just takes a little bit of forward thinking. So as always, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please do not forget to press the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in the final video of the series where we're going to slap a finish on this. See you then.